So in this video, we're going to talk about Nietzsche's idea of self-creation. This video is intended as a follow-up to my earlier Nietzsche introduction, in which I already set up the idea of self-creation, its place within Nietzsche's overall thought, and the reasons behind its importance, why Nietzsche thinks we should create ourselves and turn ourselves into works of art. In this video, I want to go into more detail, clarify what the idea is and what the idea isn't, and talk about how we can apply the idea to our actual lives. How we can create ourselves. But first, what does that mean? Remember, Nietzsche says we should give ourselves style and unify ourselves under a single taste. But aren't I already unified? I'm me, that's just one thing. I just do me, that's my style. But Nietzsche doesn't seem to think so. He says this over and over again. You shall become the person you are. We want to become those we are. Human beings who are new, unique, incomparable, who give themselves laws, who create themselves. He even entitled his autobiography, Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is. But Nietzsche, I already am what I is. I was born me, and I wasn't born somebody else, so I'm already unique and incomparable. I'm already me, so who do I have to create? For Nietzsche, being born might make you a person, but it doesn't automatically make you an individual. For him, there's a difference. An individual has a single, unified character, whereas most people don't. Because for Nietzsche, by default, people are not just one thing. They're a messy multiplicity of things. The belief that regards the soul as something indivisible, as a monad, as an atom, this belief ought to be expelled from science. My hypothesis, the subject as multiplicity. Right? People are a mess of a bunch of different contradictory drives, motivations, and impulses. Different parts of us want completely different things, and for most people there's not really a pattern to which one wins at any given time. Who they are changes constantly. One second they're this whim, then they're that whim. They're this impulse, then they're that one. Nietzsche also calls it a social structure of drives and effects. Basically, we're like countries, and our body is like the border around that country. It's an outline around a supposedly single thing that has a single name, but on the inside of that border you have a bunch of conflicting factions who don't like each other very much, have conflicting motivations and interests, and are always fighting and arguing for who gets to be in charge. But for Nietzsche, like a country, you can unite those factions and unify them under a single law and towards a single goal, giving your country a national character, turning yourself into an individual, and creating yourself. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We have a problem here we need to talk about. You're forgetting something, Nietzsche. See, I might have all these different conflicting parts, but not all these parts are equally me, because sometimes I intend to do something, and I do the thing I meant to do, and that's me because I meant to do that thing. But sometimes I do a thing that I didn't mean to do, and that's not me because I didn't mean to do that. And so this whole self-creation thing is actually pretty easy. All I have to do is decide the person I want to be and always try to be that person. Then boom, done, that's who I am. Because my actions will always be consistent with that person I want to be, because if they're ever not, they're not actually my actions, since I didn't actually intend to do them. But Nietzsche would say we're not being honest with ourselves. Our own intentions aren't something we really know or just get to decide. Everyone is farthest from himself. As one looks back on any action at all, it is and remains impenetrable. Our opinions, valuations, and tables of what is good certainly belong among the most powerful levers in the evolved mechanism of our actions. But in any particular case, the law of their mechanism is indemonstrable. Nietzsche is saying we don't have a superpower that lets us see the reasons behind our own actions. We have to interpret the reasons behind our actions, just like we have to interpret the reasons behind the actions of other people. Just think about how people often misinterpret themselves, how they think their intention was one thing and find out later it was something completely different. Like, imagine a person who gives a lot of harsh criticism, and before he criticizes somebody, he thinks to himself, I value honesty, and I'm doing this because I want to help this person. Then a few days later, he finds himself doing something ridiculously cruel and unnecessary, beating up homeless people in the alley. Then it occurs to him, maybe when I thought my intention was to help people, I actually just wanted to hurt them, because in light of recent events, I might be kind of a jerk. It's always possible for us to find that our intentions were not what we thought they were. This person thought he was just trying to be helpful and found out later he wasn't. It's always possible for a single new action to put all my old actions in a new light. They can always be reinterpreted given future events. In the exact same way that our opinions about other people are always subject to change based on future behavior. We don't know our intentions, we have to figure them out. We have special access to our thoughts, opinions, and whatever values we tell ourselves we have, and Nietzsche says these things are certainly connected to our actions, but sometimes knowing these things doesn't make it easier to understand ourselves. Sometimes it makes it harder, because we often lie to ourselves. Our conscious thoughts and conscious decisions are not the reasons behind our actions. They themselves are actions, each with their own reasons that need to be interpreted. We can ask ourselves, why did we do this action? And we can also ask ourselves, why did we think this thought? Was that thought an attempt to reaffirm something we believe strongly? Or maybe it was an attempt to deceive ourselves. Rather than say, I intended to be nice and then somehow I hurt your feelings, it's a more honest description to say, I told myself I was trying to be nice, and then I hurt your feelings. Those are two separate actions, and both say something about you that you need to interpret. Nietzsche doesn't like when people talk that way in order to separate themselves from their actions, and he would like to remind us that intentions and actions, cause and effect, are actually conceptual categories we use for breaking up and understanding events. But if you pull the concepts apart from one another and talk about them like they're two completely separate things, they stop making sense. In life, we never see a cause or an effect. We see one indivisible event. There is no being behind doing, affecting, becoming. The popular mind, in fact, doubles the deed when it sees the lightning flash. It is the deed of a deed. It posits the same event, first as a cause and then a second time as its effect. Right? We use phrases like the lightning flashed, but the lightning and its flash are the exact same thing. Lightning is a flash. Language makes us break things up into a noun and a verb. But if we don't talk about the event and we just look at it, we won't see two separate things going on. Imagine a lightning strike. See the flash in the air and the explosion it's making on the ground. When lightning is in the air, there's a flash. When it's on the ground, there's an explosion. That's how lightning and ground interact. That's what they are. If they didn't interact that way, that wouldn't be lightning and that wouldn't be ground. When two people interact and one of them gets pissed off, that is the effect these substances have on one another. You are the person who pisses off that other person. That's who you are. You are the things you do and the effect you have in any and every situation you're in. You and the things you do can't be separated. You are a series of events, just like a character in a story. Hamlet is the guy who killed Polonius. It would be ridiculous to say that's not really who he is, because if he didn't do that, he wouldn't be Hamlet, he'd be a different character. It's just as ridiculous to try to separate you from your actions. And it's dishonest to use phrases like I didn't mean to do that if you're trying to pretend that what you did doesn't have anything to do with who you are. So you don't have to ask what that action says about you, or whether you're proud or ashamed of what you did, and whether you should change yourself and try to act differently in the future. Self-creation is simultaneously a process of trying to figure out who we are while trying to change and become who we want to be. Both processes must overlap and are inseparable. Since people are chaotic, any attempt to fit all our actions into a pattern will inevitably be us making a pattern, not finding one that was already there. It will be an appealing picture of ourselves, but one based on our actual actions. And by having that picture of ourselves, our future actions will be influenced by it. And those actions will in turn influence how we picture ourselves in the future. The process of self-creation is never ending. There's always a new action we have to incorporate into our ever-changing picture we have of ourselves. New puzzle pieces are constantly being thrown at us, and we have to use every single one and somehow fit them into a coherent pattern that we can be proud of. If we are continually having new experiences and interactions, we will often find ourselves acting in ways we didn't expect ourselves to, and then we will receive new pieces that don't fit the rest of the puzzle. Sometimes that'll mean we get to add a new dimension to our picture and make it more complex and interesting. But sometimes the piece can't be made to fit into the pattern, and part of or all of the picture we had of ourselves will be shattered, and new patterns that can incorporate that piece will have to be found. And this shattering and realizing we weren't who we thought we were will probably be accompanied by shame. What is the seal of liberation? Not being ashamed in front of oneself. For Nietzsche, shame is an important part of self-creation, specifically the kind of shame we feel in front of ourselves, not the public shame we feel in front of other people. For Nietzsche, that kind of shame is just bad and makes it harder to be ourselves. But our private shame is more bittersweet. In our never-ending process of self-creation, we form pictures of ourselves, those pictures are destroyed, and then we rebuild them and do it all over again. never quite forming the perfect picture, but always forming ever more perfect ones. This means we will inevitably have periods of contentment with ourselves, followed by periods of shame. And the shame is not fun, but it pushes us to rebuild ourselves, and for it we become more interesting than if we had always just been content with ourselves. A man whose sense of shame has some profundity encounters his destinies and delicate decisions too on paths which few have ever reached. This video on self-creation is split in half. Click here to get to the second half.